Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by the University of Rhode Island Online, Navigant Credit Union, the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, Newport Film, and Half Street Group.
Bartholomew Town. All
right, welcoming back the Women Project, Jocelyn Foye. We had a conversation a couple of weeks ago that I thought was, really important. And now we have some concrete evidence of the public's, well, at least one aspect of the public's opinion on some of this weird conduct that we see around book banning and that we see around really just doing everything possible to make life for trans or otherwise gender non-conforming folks uncomfortable or impossible in the public school system. We have a really good case study in the Chariho District. Jocelyn, good morning. And just give us the executive summary of what took place in Chariho, which, full disclosure, is my alma mater. And I'm not necessarily shocked that this has become ground zero for some of these conversations.
Thanks for having me, Bill. So I would say something like 10 months ago, it was really clear that the pouring in of national far-right hate money was coming into Rhode Island and testing the waters on different school districts to see who would really bite, who would take the challenge of either going against the Rhode Island Department of Ed's policy that was protecting young people who would come to a school and say, I either want to be identified as a different gender or name, that could be kept for the protection of that child, potentially from a foster parent, guardian, or actual parent that had to stay in school. The parents couldn't be let in on that, or the guardian. So they came through and they were like, oh, we're finding different districts that are weak and that would be willing to possibly overturn these protections, starting with that. And then with the new presidential administration, a whole bunch of executive orders that if they could get the will of the school committee members to believe that an executive order was law, then maybe they would do some other damage too. So it went down the rabbit hole of book bans. It went down the rabbit hole of Title X around sports. It went down the rabbit hole of DEI. So anyway, Chariho became the district that they did some pretty nasty shenanigans. A number of people in the community were awesome, saw it coming, have been there for years paying attention and knew it was queued up. And a couple, right when the election happened and the school committee was voted in, one of the sitting school committee members decided to not stay in their seat after the election happened. And come to find out that the school committee members in Chariho illegally held a quorum to decide to not vote on a chair of that Chariho committee so that they could bring in the next vote getter in Chariho for the school committee. And it turned out to be a Moms for Liberty far-right character. And she got voted in, and then she quickly got voted in as the school committee chair, which gave a lot of footing for the 10 years of planning that a lot of people had been doing in the district to really set in motion. So we saw it come to fruition in this last school committee. That was not fast. I apologize, folks.
No, that was great. That was a really good summary. And we've done a lot of work on this here in Bartholomew Town. Wherever you're listening right now, or even if you just search Bartholomew Town Chariho, you'll probably find a handful of conversations over the years where we talk from a legal standpoint. There was a lot that went into this, questions of home rule and charter and authority to replace school committee members and elections and so on and so forth. And sort of the travel of this story is available to you as a listener. Again, probably the best way to do it. I don't have it sort of compiled anywhere, but just search Bartholomew Town Chariho if you want to go a little bit deeper. So that led us to where we are right now. Steve Alquist has a phenomenal story, as is often the case with Steve Alquist. rifuture.news is where you can find Steve's excellent work. You should subscribe and support him as best as you can. And hey, you know what happened in Chariho? You had one of these guys, and look, we've talked about him before. He's made a name for himself in a very small peer group. You can do this. Let's say you live in a small town, and you have a club of people that go and collect rocks on the shoreline or something like that. Within that group, there's going to be celebrities like, who this person collects the best rocks, but outside of that group, no one really cares. I mean, so this guy. He's from Westerly. He's kind of a mean-spirited individual. He calls talk radio programs and, has crude remarks. But He is one of the leaders of this very minor group of people that is anti-trans. They're transphobic. They have this bizarre disposition that's retroactive or retrograde. He shows up at the school committee meeting on last week and gets booed as he approaches the rostrum to offer his take. What happened here?
That was awesome. So everybody knew he was coming. He's done a good job of really publicly putting out where he is. Lately, he's changed his tune. He likes to do some meanderings behind the scenes, but this time he was for sure going to be there, along with a lot of the other members of the Moms for Liberty and the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, which incidentally, that is the org, if people really want to do a little digging, has the legal backing. We've discovered that there's only a few lawyers that all the school committees share. So they're sharing referenda, they're sharing policy challenges at the state level. And anyway, so he was there. And at first, the first speaker who came up at the school committee for public comment started saying something, and the crowd just like erupted in applause in support of this young guy. And he was a former Chariho alum, trans, while being in the school. And so he tells his story, and the crowd stands up, cheers for him. It's like, we're talking 250 people, right? And they stand up and they're cheering loudly, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. So I will tell you, Louise Denmore, I forget her last name, this Moms for Liberty chair of the committee, started the speaking by saying, we're going to tell truth. We're going to be respectful. If there's any gossip or misinformation, we won't have it. And so when Bob gets up, he's immediately booed by the majority of the people in the room. And then he starts talking about people's private parts and how that somehow has to do with people's well-being. And then he says, due to President Trump's executive order, it's now law that, and people started, I was one of them, started by yelling false or not true. And so a couple of us sat in the crowd, and Louise looks at us and she's like, you're out of order. Stop talking. And we were like, you said that you wanted truth. An executive order is not law. And so she got so frazzled. The crowd then picked up. Everybody yelled. Everybody was like, that's a lie, blah, blah, blah. And she said that she was gonna go on recess. They were gonna hold a recess to like let everyone chill out. And she then got pushed more, and people said, no, go back on your statement. Like, admit that an executive order is not law. It was great. The audience was really like on point, and they built off of each other's energy. And so in the end, she was like, I'm going to just end this meeting. Do I have a second? And someone seconded it. And one of the other school committee members is like, you can't end this committee meeting. We have a budget to decide. Like, there's like real things that are concrete aside from this conversation that you have to get us through. And actually her colleagues were really visibly upset with her. You don't see that in any recordings. Mm-hmm. And so she's like, okay, we're just going to all be respectful of each other. Can you just all over there? And she's pointing to some of us who had started. And she goes, can we all just be respectful and let Bob speak? And we're like, well, if he's going to lie and go on the record lying, then no. And she's like, we're going to just be good people or whatever. And so he does get his comments in, and people boom away. And I mean, he was two speakers of 35 who spoke to wanting this policy to move forward. And in the end, I will tell you, it was phenomenal. We had a lawyer that was there from the Center for Justice named Jen Wood, who came up, and first things first, she's like, let me explain to you what an executive order is. And then you had then you had doctors come up and talk about there's no issue here with like the bathroom policies and what the impact was. You had teachers talking about this is not what the kids are complaining about. They're complaining about these other issues. You had one woman who came up and she said, as a parent of the district, she did an APRA request for any sort of the sexual assault or sexual abuse charges that were being done in the town, and none of them were done by trans folks. all of them were done by boys. And so you just had people who were so tight. Like, this is credit to the community leaders in that district that we worked with. We were like, what kind of like how did you have to web out to get the right people talking, to tell the right story that really just like nailed it home? And when I say the right people, I just mean you have some people telling personal stories. You have some people telling a story as a parent. You have some people talking professionally. And in the end, like, you had the woman who was the head of the Chariho Democratic Town Committee stand up. She goes, well, I had a speech ready. She's like, but at this point, she turns around to the audience. She goes, if any of you would like to run for Chariho School Committee, I will personally, like, it was great. She was just like, you're all here. The energy's in the room. You see how broken these folks are and how they're breaking the law. They're using corruption and crooked methods to get this far. Let's change things. And the room was filled with it. And people so people really wanted to feel good about democracy and feel good for people's moment to speak. I have not been in a room, and I've done this for about 8 years, pretty aggressively. And I came out of that elated that just felt. And at the end, the school committee voted to not take up the policy again. They decided that they would bench it for a long time. We'll see how long that really is. And that this was off their docket. They had committee members who are like, we don't ever want to deal with this again because this isn't an issue. Right. And so they voted on that as like, okay, we're done. They are going back to the library and media policy, which does kind of vaguely include challenges with book bans. But we have 2 pieces of legislation at the state level that would take care of that this year. And rumor has it it's going to pass. It's such a good suite of bills.
It's an example of when people step up and challenge, quite frankly, like you said, illegal, corrupt methods of trying to get an agenda through. And this is the power of democracy. It's the power of human beings doing the right thing. And so now you have a scenario where ground zero in the eyes of some of these activist organizations, be it the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity or otherwise, have identified Chariho as a vulnerable district to try to implement, whether you want to call it policy or just energy of a negative nature around gender nonconforming students. The district said, yeah, we're not going to do it. And this is the front line to a lot of what needs to happen in this country.
Right. And I will say, look, the Center for Freedom and Prosperity is looking for any one school district to break the law, go against the Rhode Island Department of Ed's policy, and say that they're not going to follow the policy, that they are going to out students illegally, and it's still going to go to the Rhode Island Supreme Court. I think the writing on the wall, though, that they're seeing is that they don't have a case. And we've learned that because of a First Circuit Court decision that just came out of New Hampshire that is our circuit court here in Rhode Island. And it basically says that the parents don't have the rights, that the young people have the rights, which is awesome. So we have precedent on our side. There was one other case coming out of Vermont that we have also in our region, and it again protects us. So I think that in terms of this particular fight, we're going to see it district by district still. And there's still 6 to 8 districts that we're watching and we're very nervous about. They are mostly on the western edge of the state that want to do damage. They have now a full Republican school committee. And so they're ready to make some waves. But you also see school committee members who are doing their job as professionals being like, why would we spend time on this if there's no movement, like no able movement, right, politically?
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Why would we spend time on something that is clearly, at this stage anyway, and it's again, there are certainly plenty of front lines for which this can continue to unfold, but it's becoming clear that in addition to this stuff being mean-spirited, in addition to this stuff being, by the way, it's almost funny because it's such a weird and crude environment for people to get excited about. Like, it's hard for me to imagine my identity being based on, let me just go and implement my views, which may be driven by religious fanaticism or some other kind of creepy, worldview, outdated. Maybe this was a tool that would have been useful 500 years ago or something like that. But in the contemporary world, I mean, who the hell spends their time driving around school committee meetings, screaming about vulnerable kids and trying to do everything they can to make them uncomfortable. I mean, this is the type of bizarre behavior that, even from a journalistic standpoint, putting a pure journalism hat on, it makes no sense, because what ends up happening is, it is, as you said, and as was proven in this Chariho case study, it's a waste of time legally. It's stupid.
Yeah.
Get a life.
Agreed. I mean, here's the other thing. Let's end it on the voice of the young people, right, that we're working with, which is they're pissed that this dude from outside of their district is coming in and talking about their private parts, who they've never met. He doesn't know them from boo. And he's going in and having all these comments that he's making about them. And they're like, who is this guy? Like, this is gross. Like, they're talking about him as a pedophile. They're talking about him like really, like, it's a really bad move, even for, like, if I was being generous, for any not-for-profit like Moms for Liberty, I'd recheck their methods, because it's really dysfunctional to then be called pedophiles. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I will say there's a lot of work ahead, and there's a lot of folks who need to kind of see this story right in front of their face, rather than read about it or hear about it on the radio or get a text with like a little reel about it. They're going to need to experience it too. But I will say Rhode Island is poised to really defend its folks as best they can. And that's the range of folks in their gender range of identity. I mean, like, their gender expression. So I think that I'm feeling excited and hopeful in a moment where there feels like there's very little of that in our world.
Right. What's next in terms of, have you identified, or is there any other district right now that has a similar sort of process ahead where we might see another test of sorts?
Sure. So Gloucester and Foster is a big one that was really tested out early on in this process for us. And then Smithfield and North Smithfield also just completely flipped. So their school districts are now completely red. You have Johnston, who's also got a mayor who says trans people don't exist, and you have a school committee who completely agrees. You have people who show up to each one of those towns' school committees that are clapping in the same way that people were on our side in Chariho. So you have a really an anti-trans community in general organizing there. And I think that that's what took time in Chariho to build. And that was something that was the collaboration with so many, some of us, like Women Project at state level, and so many in the Chariho regions. But I mean, that's where the work is now. I will tell you, there's been attacks in Newport right now on DEI, and they're not stopping, even though the people are showing out and showing up. You have strange behaviors happening. People are like, what? In East Providence and in Bristol. So it's not like people are like, oh, it's not the liberal towns. It's like, no. It's everywhere. It's not just one, right? And it's not, I said earlier, the western edge of the state, it's not just that. So.
Right. Yeah, it's important to remember that demographically, these policies and these concepts don't exclusively align with what you see in a map of, let's say, the most recent presidential election where the red, blue. The Newport conversation is really fascinating and really important, because Newport is, of course, it's a blue town, no doubt about it, but there's also an element of traditionalism there that is vulnerable and susceptible to these types of duping methods that we see Moms for Liberty and other organizations using. I mean, the bottom line is that, again, you look at the world right now. I mean, we're going really macro, really meta here, but you look at the world right now, it's like, please, this is what you're focused on. And, you want to have a conversation on an individualized basis about specific aspects of policy, fine. But that's maybe something that some people would be willing to have in a mature way. But the blanket notion of let's go around different school committees and create a scene, a little peer group. Again, you can find people who've made a name for themselves in the world of shortwave radio repair. Every niche has a right to exist. This is a niche group of people. Most people don't feel this way, and that's it. Jocelyn Foye, the Women Project, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. Hey, thanks for stopping by Bartholomew Town. For more content, follow me on Instagram @BillBartholomew.